Welcome to Weekly Wisdom, where every single week we seek to take a piece of God's wisdom and then apply that to our everyday life. This is such a heated political season. Recently, they wrapped up the presidential debate, and we just had the vice presidential debate, and there has been no other time in my lifetime, maybe in yours, but certainly not in my lifetime, where there have been two candidates that have more divided our country, divided families, divided friendships, and relationships overall than the candidates we have today. Because I think most people would agree that these two candidates are polarizing, and most people that I talk to seem to be voting against someone rather than voting for someone because they're afraid of their values and principles and policies. Now, I told you in our last video, I've been studying and meditating a lot on the book of James. And as I was reading this week, this whole idea of how divided people are and how heated discussions have gotten around politics and all of this nonsense, these verses that I read today really got me thinking about that issue. So I wanted to share them with you today, along with a few of my thoughts. And so we're in James chapter 2, and we're going to pick up with verse 8. Listen to what James says. If you really keep the royal law found in Scripture, love your neighbor as yourself, you are doing right. And what James is referring to as this royal law is what Jesus spoke of in Matthew chapter 7, the Gospel of Matthew chapter 7, verse 12. He said that all of the law in the prophets, all of the laws in Scripture could be summed up in a single statement, and that is, as you interact with other people, do to them what you would have them do to you. Treat other people the way that you want to be treated. And this was repeated in another place when Jesus was asked about summing up all of the commandments and asking, these religious leaders asked him what were the most important. If he could narrow it down, what was the most important commandment? And they were trying to trap him in a situation, but he, with his amazing wisdom, said, look, it boils down to two things. Love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And so that principle, this idea of treating others the way that you want to be treated, respecting others the way you want to be respected, is based upon that teaching. But look at what James says next. In verse 9, he says, but if you show favoritism, you sin and are convicted by the law as lawbreakers. For whoever keeps the whole law yet stumbles at just one point is guilty of breaking all of it. All of a sudden, James switches gears and he begins to talk about showing favoritism. And what I believe James is talking about is that there are times in our relationships when we compromise unnecessarily. When we compromise things that we shouldn't compromise because we're playing, as James says, favorites. We're playing favorites. And we'll say, oh, well, it's just them. Oh, well, that's just how they are, or that's just how they act, or that's just how they talk, or that's just how they behave. And we make excuses for them. And what James is saying is there are no excuses. And when you play favorites, and when I play favorites in my relationships and compromise on godly values, things that actually matter, we might as well be breaking every rule in the book. We're guilty of compromising every value and every principle that God has when we behave that way, when we play favorites. Essentially, we shouldn't make excuses for people. It's not that you can never compromise. Compromise is usually a good thing, especially when it's on issues that don't have to do with a godly principle and Christian values. But when it has to do with something that Jesus has clearly laid out, a path for us, a principle that God has been very clear that's important to him and should be sacred to us, this is something that we shouldn't compromise on. And we shouldn't play favorites. So as you go about your week this week, keep that in mind. Keep in mind not playing favorites and making sure that we respect others the way that we want to be respected. Even when those people don't agree with your principles, even when they don't agree with your values, even when they don't behave the way that you behave, still continue to show respect and to treat them the way that you would want to be treated, because that is a godly principle that is worthy of not compromising. That's today's weekly wisdom. I hope that you found today's video encouraging. If so, hit that thumbs up button, and that'll help other people to see it. And if you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, consider doing so you don't miss out on any of the weekly short studies that we do together. Have a great week.